The creature knocked on his door at 2 a.m. It wanted help. The knock at 2 a.m. 2 a.m. Wind sliding off the frozen lake through every seam in the wood, and a set of old keys on his porch chime spoke a strange rhythm. 3 short, 1 long. Then, silence. Jonah Cole sat by the blue tongue of the stove flame, watching a kettle think about boiling, when a knock touched the door. Not wind, not animal. A patient, well-mannered knuckle, as if it understood what a door is. Jonah stood hand to the top latch, not the rifle. He whispered to the cold, "Don't make me choose tonight." The knock repeated, same cadence, 3 short, 1 long. He slipped the upper latch, kept the lower, and opened a slit just wide enough for an eye. The doorway filled. No meat smell, no hunter's breath. Resin and wet wood, and the metallic clean of winter. In the stove-lit gloom he saw it, a fist-sized wood shard speared under the creature's left rib's fur and skin, tar-dark around it. No roar. It tapped the door once more, then lifted a broad, furred hand to its own chest, and knocked 2 knuckles to its sternum, a gesture that read, "Half me, half hurt." "You came for help, didn't you?" Jonah didn't wait for an answer. He owned nothing fancy, an old first-aid box, tent needles and nylon thread, iodine, a headlamp on dying batteries, a pair of tweezers that usually plucked splinters. Some nights that's enough to turn a poor kitchen into a small theater of mercy. He eased the lower latch. The door opened another finger's width. The creature didn't step inside it, lowered itself so the wound sat level with the counter. Dark eyes held steady, not begging, not threatening. Only trusting. Jonah set the kettle down, drew the folding table to the threshold, and spread a tent cloth. "I won't rush," he said, "and I'll keep quiet." The key chime broke into scattered notes, 3 short, 1 long, 1 short, either the wind changing or a storm turning up valley, or someone else out there learning the same rhythm Jonah was hearing. "Before we start," his voice dropped, "tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments. When this tale ends, rate it from 0 to 10. Now, if you can stare straight at fear without flinching, come with me to part 1. Signs at 2 a.m., because no plea for help appears from nowhere. It walks a road longer than we think. Some doors only open when the inside is calm enough and the outside hurts enough. Part 1, Signs at 2 a.m. The lake was black as a blade. Under the eaves, Jonah's old sled twitched once as if a hand had tested its straps. The key chime didn't jangle at random, 3 short, 1 long, then hush. Jonah stood in the kitchen headlamp, dimmed to a smudged stove flame steady, and felt a thing he knew too well. Learn a new trick, silence with direction. It started at the water's edge where thin ice shattered into glass threads, and it walked straight to his door. There were marks on the porch. Not boot, not hoof. Heavy, careful placements spaced like each step had been considerate of the floor beneath it. A long, coarse hair was snagged on the wrapped handle, too thick for wolf glossy as ink when the stove light caught it. On the siding, a single dark droplet dried to the color of old iron. Jonah didn't touch it. He glanced at the shortwave set, the antenna jury-rigged with fishing lines still coughing static like nails in a can, and felt oddly grateful there was no one to call tonight. The knock landed exactly at 2, 3 small, 1 long. Firm without pushy. Polite without timid. Jonah opened the door in 2 stages, the top for eyes, the bottom for words, and the silhouette filled the frame. No butcher's heat, no hunting breath, only resin-wet wood and a cold iron smell. Beneath the left ribs, a wedge of wood had driven in on an angle, bruising deep fur glued by sap. A dark eye looked straight through the slit at the man holding the latch, not asking, not daring, placing its trust where it belonged. Jonah kept the room dark. He pulled the folding table to the threshold, spread a tent cloth, and laid out the only tools that mattered. An old first-aid tin tweezers, a sewing needle threaded with nylon, a roll of gauze iodine, a pinch of pain powder to dissolve in warm water, and a thin shaved slat he'd whittled to act as a pressure paddle while he stitched. He didn't say, "Come in." He brought the kitchen to the door, turning the threshold itself into a work line. The creature understood at once. It settled, so the wound met the tabletop, tapped 2 knuckles to its own breastbone, half me, half hurt, and waited like a tradesman handing over a job to another tradesman. Jonah pointed to the warm bowl to his chest, then opened his palm. I'll give, not take. The creature didn't drink. It pointed at the wound, then fixed on the tweezers. You know what you need, Jonah whispered. Then I'd better become who I need to be. He wet cotton with iodine and brought it close to test for flinch. The eye didn't pinch. It blinked once, slow as a nod. He set the thin slat across the cut to feel the pressure mapped the grain parallel extraction anything else, and the frayed fibers would shred what they were supposed to save. Right then, the key chime sounded the same cadence again, 3 short, 1 long, and 1 extra short off-key too quick to be weather. Wind doesn't learn that fast. Somewhere along the shore, something else was mimicking the signal this door had just received. Jonah didn't turn his head. He kept the kitchen a sealed world with a single answer: help or run. He hates running. He spoke for both of them. If I hurt you, don't jerk. If you jerk, we both lose. He took the tweezers, found the clean line refused force until he found angle drew a long breath. The creature set its good hand on the door not to brace but to keep it open. Something very small and very human crossed the threshold at the same instant as the stove's blue flame licked the kettle. Only when metal touched wood did Jonah allow himself to think about time ice out there cracking in capillaries, wind pushing the footbridge over the spill channel. If someone in the trees was chasing the chime's pattern, they'd reach this porch before the snow began in earnest. This splinter would be out clean now, or it would become an excuse for a dragnet that didn't need facts. I'll keep your name quiet, he said, as if the creature had one he could use. He locked the slats set. The tweezers counted in his head, 1 2-pull smooth, as lifting a thorn from a palm, except this thorn was under a rib. The wound bunched, a dark line surged, then stilled under firm bandage pressure. The creature didn't hiss, didn't roar. Its breath slipped into the same cadence, 3 short, 1 long, as if pacing its own pain. He heard something else on the porch sled leather being tested again, soft, competent. Maybe men, maybe wolves, maybe a wind that liked pretending to be both. Whatever it was, it gave the kitchen a deadline. Jonah threaded the needle, doubled the nylon, locked the first knot, and chose to stitch right at the threshold so no one could say he'd dragged something not human into the house. He'd run the seam with the tier 3 short bites where the tissue thinned too longer, where it thickened not buried under the edge of the slat. He looked up once more and asked with his eyes permission. The answer was no retreat. That was enough. And just like that, the night's pressure shifted from knocking on wood to a needle through skin from mystery at the lake, to a pact at the kitchen door where a man chose tweezers and thread over lock and gun. Part 2. The Wound and the Quiet Promise. The shard slid free the way a thorn does when you find the one right angle. Jonah pressed gauze until the dark line gentled, then hit the edges with iodine and set the shaved slat to steady the skin while he stitched. He sewed like he'd been taught by cold and necessity short bites where the flesh thinned longer where it carried weight knot hidden under the edge so nothing would snag. The creature did not flinch. It kept its breath in that odd rhythm he'd started to understand, 3 short, 1 long, like counting backwards to stay. Listen, Jonah said without looking up. I don't call folks for things I can fix. If someone else shows, I didn't send them. He meant it as oath, not bravado. The creature's good hand tapped once on the jam and rested there, which was as close to a handshake as they were going to manage. He cut the last knot and laid a clean wrap, snug but not mean. You'll have to move like you're made of hinges, not springs, he said. Pull and you'll tear what I just bought you. He mixed a pinch of powder into warm water and set the cup near, but not in reach. He wasn't going to teach thirst to distrust. The chime on the porch answered itself, 1 short, 2 long off-kilter, mimicry at the wrong tempo. Men then, or men trying to pass for wind. Jonah slid his toolbox aside with a careful shoe and made a quick inventory in his head. Radio, dead lake, brittle footbridge, flexing a sled under the eaves that would squeal if yanked wrong. He wrapped a second strip of gauze around the creature's chest to remind the ribs to behave and tied the tails flat like a sailor. Can you walk? He asked, showing the question with his shoulders and the shape of his hands. The answer was a deliberate straightening and a test step that bent nothing he'd just fixed. "Good," he said. "We leave the door as we found it." They didn't share names. They shared air. At the threshold, Jonah paused. "If there are others," he said, "and they're yours, they'll find you. If they aren't, they'll find me. Either way, I keep quiet." The creature looked once at the coil of nylon thread on the table, then at Jonah, and lowered its eyes, a courtesy so unexpected it made him swallow. Outside, the temperature had the cruel honesty of a blade. The lake's black skin held, but the footbridge over the spill channel chattered under invisible pressure. Far down shore, a light blinked and died. Not stars. Men had a way of misunderstanding distance when their hands were cold. Jonah closed the door to a finger's width and turned back to the table. "One more," he said. "A strip to keep the wrap honest." He circled the torso once more with cloth that would give enough to breathe, but not enough to undo the seam. When he finished, the creature reached with its good hand, found the rough patch on the door where men knocked, and touched it gently. Then it pointed first to the lake, then to the low path along the spill, asking without asking for a route that did not invite company. Below the bridge, Jonah said, "Stay under the wind. Walk where the dead grass hides your prints." He lifted the latch without drama and stepped back so the door could belong to whoever used it next. The creature moved like a verdict, careful, considered, final. When it reached the shallow steps, it glanced once at the key chime, and the keys stirred on their ring as if someone had said thank you in metal. Part 3. Pulling the bullet in stove light. Jonah should have known the night hadn't finished with him. He was cleaning the tweezers when the second knock came. Not the same cadence, not the same weight. Lighter, ragged, wrong. He cracked the door and saw a different shape on the porch, small, hunched, both arms clamped to its side as if wrapping something in. Blood had dried in a pattern that argued with the angle of the first wound. No shard here. A hole that burned from the inside out. Close, Jonah whispered, opening the door just enough to turn the threshold back into a workbench. He pulled a magnet, and a headlamp he hadn't meant to use popped. The battery compartment shook life out of it and kept the beam low. The entry was under the shoulder, the exit not a promise. He set the slat against the flesh and palpated for the line of travel. The creature's eyes didn't leave his face. Lead, he asked, the air. Steel would argue with the magnet. The magnet argued back. The pull said yes. The path said maybe. He warmed a spoon to lay against the skin so shock wouldn't own the next minute. Then opened the old tin and found what he'd kept for splinters, a small steel probe and a pair of finer forceps he almost never trusted. "We do this once and we do it right," he said, and heard himself the same sentence different night. On the lake, a sled hissed and failed to hide it. The keys on the chime clicked a single betraying note. Men again. Jonah reached for the radio and clicked it dead, almost tenderly, as if to thank it for being useless. He set his shoulder against the doorframe and did the math angle of entry depth by breath, the tolerance of a rib cage that had been taught to hold still. "On me," he told the creature, and the creature placed its palm against the jamb and matched Jonah's breathing. He slid the probe along the track the injury had already made, feeling for the hard thought of metal. When the tip found the edge, he set the forceps and pinched slow as winter. The dark line rose. He drew it toward the light, and a small round tooth of lead came with it, nursing a tail that had torn more story than he liked. He dropped the bullet into a chipped saucer, and it rang a note so brief he almost doubted it. Gauze. Pressure. Iodine. Another seam, this one shorter and stubborn. He stitched, not pretending to own anything but the needle. When he tied off, the creature exhaled a sound that had nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with duration, the voice of a thing that had decided to endure in advance. Boots scuffed the path, 2, maybe 3, keeping low to stay less wrong than they were. Jonah set his mouth in a line and reached for the one thing he hadn't used, the old sled. He dragged it an inch. The runners complained in an upstairs voice that carried clean into the wind. "There," he said, almost cheerful. "If you're listening for noise, listen well." He set the sled crooked toward the spill bridge and scuffed tracks in a sloppy argument any fool could follow. He turned back. Under the footbridge, he said again, then cut left into the reeds. The ice will hold the weight you have if you don't announce it. He tied a strip of cloth to the doorknob, a signal to himself more than anyone else. This house is not a trap. The creature touched the saucer with the bullet in it, then raised 2 fingers to its brow and away salute, or simple goodbye. It slipped into the dark the way a well-built tool slips into a hand. Part 4. Across the ice and the confrontation. The men came before the snow. That was their mistake. Jonah met them halfway down the path where cattails made the night speak in syllables of paper. Evening 1 said, as if the word could pretend it wasn't 2 in the morning. "We heard a sled." "You heard my sled complain about its age," Jonah said. "She does that when I think about using her." He let his hands hang where pockets would have been if the coat had any. "You boys are off the road. Spill's this way. We're tracking a wounded dog," the second offered eyes, cutting past Jonah toward the porch. The stove glowed the faithful shape of a kettle doing its slow work. "Big one." "Dogs don't knock," Jonah said, and watched the question fail to find purchase on their faces. "And if it's wounded, you're late. Winter does the rest of your work, if you wait long enough." The first man smiled with only half his mouth. "Mind if we look around?" "Mind, no," Jonah said. "Permit? Yes. Pick one." "The law doesn't need a permit to save stock," the second tried. "It does need a warrant to open a door that isn't yours," Jonah answered. "Because the only way out of a bad sentence is a better one." He didn't move his feet. He moved his chin. "You want the spill channel, under the bridge. The reeds hold tracks tighter than your memory." Behind the men, the lake breathed a subtle pop along the ice's seam, and the cattails ratcheted like someone slowly zipping the night up. The first man glanced back without wanting to. Jonah let him. Fear has its own gravity. Tell you what Jonah said. You circle that way. If the sled squeals, you'll have me dead to rights for being an idiot. If it doesn't, you'll have your quiet, and I'll have mine. He nodded toward the bridge, and his nod had the patient authority of someone who'd spent a lifetime choosing not to escalate. They peeled off with the awkward bravado of people who can't admit they're cold. When their silhouettes lost their edges in the reeds, Jonah stepped to the porch and took the strip of cloth off the knob. The door was a door again. Behind it, the kettle finally boiled. He didn't follow the creatures. He followed the rules he'd made in the 5 minutes that mattered. Keep the name quiet. Keep the seam clean. Keep men away from what they don't intend to understand. He stood at the lake's edge and watched the bridge hum to its own tolerances. Under the planks, shadows moved with the discipline of animals who understand both hand and hazard. When they reached the far side, the reeds swallowed them in a kindness men can't manage. A minute later, from the dark line of trees, a low note rolled across the ice, not a call exactly, not for him. A report, perhaps. Alive. It folded into the wind and left nothing you could carry to town. The mark on the door. By morning, flurries had turned the yard into fresh paper. Jonah swept the porch because that's what a porch expects and put his tools away in the order that makes tomorrow possible. He washed the saucer and left it upside down to dry. The bullet he slid into a matchbox and wrote nothing on it. On the inside of the door, at the eye level of a hand built larger than his, he scratched a small mark with the tip of a knife, 2 short, 1 long, 2 short. Not a welcome. A code that meant if you knock for help, the answer here is yes, and the story will go nowhere else. Around noon on the step, he found something he hadn't put there, a length of split reed tied into a neat loop, no clever braids, no human knots. The wind could have made it. The wind had never been that tidy. He hung it from a nail beside the key chime. The keys kept their own counsel. The reed barely moved. If this felt like a lamp in your window, tell us where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments, and when we're done, rate the story from 0 to 10. Subscribe for the next winter on the lake. Some knocks at 2 in the morning aren't danger asking to be answered. They're courage asking for a steady hand.